Digital 410 Productions proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts Dodd Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Henry Sledge.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast. We want to thank each and every one of you for supporting the show and hanging out with us again on another wonderful Monday night. And shout out to some of the patrons who upgraded their accounts last week to help out and help support the show. And if you want to do the same thing, please head over to WTSPWWII.com, click on that link, and sign up. But we'll get to more adverts later. Joining us, as always, is the ever faithful, ever on time, and ever jubilant and happy Henry Sledge. Henry, how you doing tonight, fellow?
I'm doing okay, man. How are you doing, Don?
I'm doing well. Oh, it's been a crazy last couple of days at work, but I'm not going to get into that here because, well, it's not relevant to what we're doing. But
no, we don't want to get into the crazy personal stuff that each of us are dealing with.
No, not at all. So, but yeah, we're just happy to be here. Happy to have you guys join us once again. And we're going to go to the other side of the pond. We do a lot of PTO talk here. We do a lot of air battle talk here. But prior to the show, I got together with Jeff and Henry, which, by the way, Jeff is away this week and possibly next week, but he will be returning very soon. But before a few hours ago, we were like, well, what are we going to talk about tonight, fellas? And Henry had a great idea, and it never occurred to me, and partially because after doing some research, this battle, this raid in which we're going to talk about for a little bit here, sadly, it's kind of gone down as a very forgotten battle and conflict for the Canadian Army, even though it was sadly resulted in being one of their deadliest battles. And to think that worldwide, a major ally such as the Canadians and Canada, that one of their bloodiest battles is kind of overlooked and forgotten by history. And so praise to Henry for wanting to do this topic. And so let's get into it a little bit, Henry.
So, yeah, I mean, we're August of course, today's August 22nd, but here within the last few days, we're 80th anniversary of August of 1942, which was, we know what we talked about last time. Our beloved Pacific theater was Guadalcanal, but tonight we were thinking about heading to the shores of France and talking about Dieppe.
Which, sadly and ironically, the irony had come later after the result of this raid, but it was originally codenamed Operation Jubilee. And what I found interesting researching Operation Jubilee is as the war was progressing and as the RAF was limited on things to do because the Royal Air Force had their own bombardment branch that kind of operated kind of separately from the dogfighters, if you will. They were occupying the time of the RAF by having them going over German-occupied France and strategically attacking areas. And Henry can attest to this because him and Jeff are the resident aviation guys here. But apparently Germany was kind of premiering or up and steaming on a more advanced fighter than what the RAF had. Is that correct, Henry?
Well, I mean, 42, the Germans would have been flying the Bf-109E, or Emil, to your code name Emil, which is just the name for the letter E in the German alphabet. But yeah, they would have had Bf-109Es probably, and they would have been moving on. I'm not sure when the Bf-109F came into service. I had a really good book on the air war, on the air actions over Dieppe that I read many years ago. And just disclaimer to anybody, to our listeners tonight. I mean, I'm no expert on Dieppe. Don, I don't think you would call yourself one either.
I learned everything I'm about to tell you about 30 minutes ago. So it's fresh in my mind.
But hey, man, we have that passion for the subject, right? Well, I mean, everybody talks about D-Day.
Yep.
Which obviously was June of
August
44.
7th, 1942. Oh, sorry. I guess it depends on which side of the globe that D-Day means to you.
Are we going to talk about the B-72 bomber? I love you, man. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, so the Germans would have been fielding the Bf-109s, okay? So the British, by 1942, I mean, the Spitfire, they might have had the 5B by 1942. Again, had I had more time to refresh my memory on Dieppe, they were Spitfires. Not sure if they were Mark 5Bs or still Mark 1s and 2s. I think the Mark 1s and 2s had evolved by 1942.
Well, the reason I bring it up is this actually plays a key role into the development and the decision making behind the entire operation of Operation Jubilee, which I was kind of surprised to find out. So for those of you playing along at home, much like myself who just discovered this most recently, while the RAF was making these strategic airstrikes, apparently these German Luftwaffe planes were a little more advanced to the point where the British had a hard time fighting them off in one-on-one, two-on-one skirmishes. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to come up with a way to invite the Luftwaffe out in mass, if you will. How can we bring these guys out in mass, bring out a majority of their inventory, if you will, close enough to us that we can, fly reinforcements back from mainland England, if you will, and try to eliminate as many as the Luftwaffe's inventory as possible. And so they came up with Operation Jubilee, which is, let's take a bunch of guys, land them over here on this coast, draw out the Luftwaffe and the efforts that they're going to try to strafe and attack the landing crafts, and then we can just take everything we have and have a big air battle and hopefully reduce their numbers in a fashion that we can continue to do, air raids over occupied France with less damage to us in future battles. Pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, I think so. Like you, man, I did some fact finding today. I watched some things that I was able to shoehorn in while I was at work,
sure,
which I can do, fortunately, and still get my job done on Dieppe, because I've always been really intrigued by it. There were the facts, the numbers I found. Of course, numbers are always going to vary. There were 1,200 Allied aircraft involved in the Dieppe raid. British, Canadian. There were even some American. Now they would have been. I think they would have been like the Eagle Squadron guys,
kind of like the Lend-Lease guys,
huh?
Kind of like the Lend-Lease guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they were showing up, flying Mustangs, which obviously in 1942 was a little bit early for them, but they were flying Spitfires. I believe they were flying under British colors.
Yeah, I guess I misspoke. That's kind of what I meant. We kind of had pilots on loan before we actually got involved, and so that's what I meant by the Lend-Lease guys. We kind of loaned them pilots as well.
I had another figure that said the numbers of aircraft involved were more like 800. So 800 to 1,200, okay, on the Allied side.
That's still quite a substantial aerial dogfight battle, if you will.
It is, and from the information I came upon, I don't think it almost, as I watched and educated myself on it, it almost reminded me like, D-Day, skip ahead to June of 44 when D-Day, with the mass of naval and army and ground activity going on at D-Day, there really was not a whole lot of aerial activity. The Luftwaffe just didn't come out. Now, to get away from D-Day, because that's not what we're here to talk about, to get back to Dieppe, it was from what I learned, sort of a similar dynamic. I mean, there were a few sorties by the Germans, but not en masse like they hoped. I mean, there were not these clouds of FW-190s and 109s and JU-88s, and there just wasn't this mass level response that the Allies had hoped for that would then give our guys a chance to really get some aerial scores. I think, well, in fact, I don't want to jump into it too early, but aircraft lost. If you go by the 1,200 Allied aircraft that we put up for the Dieppe raid, the Allies lost, one number I saw was 106. You know how many aircraft the Germans lost?
No.
48.
Wow.
So, and yet, it's not considered a failure on the part of Allied air.
Yeah, it's kind of saddening and a little astonishing to think that the numbers were so tilted against us, considering, as we just said, this entire mission was kind of dreamt up and organized with this one goal in mind, which is let's try to, eliminate as many planes from the Luftwaffe's inventory as possible, and then to come around and have those numbers before we even get to the landing numbers. It's kind of...
Yeah, I mean, the real tragedy, as we know, was for the Canadians once the guys got ashore. And then you're talking about a massive loss of life. Probably, I think it's called the worst in Canadian history.
Yeah. And as we were saying earlier, not only, it kind of, I don't know if it was done purposefully, but afterwards you can kind of look at it. When you're looking at the landing beaches, the way they're split up into 7 beaches, the way in which the landing was coming in, and almost the shape of the landing area, it's very reminiscent of when you're looking at comparing it to D-Day, and the fact that it happened 2 years prior.
Yes.
And by the way, this was outside of anything going on in Africa and all that. This was the biggest campaign put forth by the British since Dunkirk. I mean, this was kind of their next big give it a go and let's see what happens type thing. And the bonus on this raid, the other bonuses we've all heard before, when going to the D-Day thing, part of the D-Day, Stalin really wanted us to open up a second front to alleviate the pressure on the Russians and the Eastern Front. Well, this was kind of like the precursor to that. They're like,
exactly.
Okay, not only let's open up a second front, it wasn't as large as Stalin wanted. 2, let's kind of, I don't know if this was even put in place or mined. I don't even know if the planning for D-Day had even started being planned yet. I'm assuming it possibly had, but under this hypothesis, let's say that it had. Here's a good dry run for doing a semi-large scale amphibious landing of men and equipment. And the aforementioned, hopefully we can take out the Luftwaffe. And so this operation had multiple potential benefits if things could go right. And now, interestingly enough, here's the number breakdown. You had 5,000 Canadian infantry, 1,000 British troops, and 50 U.S. Army Rangers, which I was surprised to hear about. Now, the reason the Canadians outnumbered the British troops, even though this was a British-led, dreamt up, and pushed-out operation, is the Canadians had sent over so many men, and they're just kind of sitting around staging areas all throughout England. Right. And as we've seen in other stories, other movies, other shows, other books, that when you have guys sitting around training for long periods of time, it affects their morale and, it actually softens them up. And so basically the Canadian higher-ups kind of said, hey, we're looking for something to do over here to keep our boys, ready to fight. And so, for lack of better phrases, the British like, okay, cool, we got something for you to do. And that's primarily the reason, is there were so many guys over there in all these different staging areas waiting for an operation that they kind of raised their hand and got put in place. And so this is kind of what goes on to be why this is the largest operation, as we mentioned before. I don't want to give too much away before we get to the ending, but why this goes down in the Canadian history the way it does. That's why there are so many of them there compared to the British and the surprisingly 50 U.S. Rangers. I'm sure they were there kind of on a, get some experience type situation, maybe to lend some Raider type experience. Because interestingly enough, they were sent down to Orange Beach, and then and as we were saying again, their situation was kind of similar to what they would be, objected to do at Pointe du Hoc on D-Day, which was to go occupy some particular area for a certain amount of time, then get the hell out of Dodge. And so those were the numbers going in.
Do you know how many ships were involved?
I know that there was, I think, about 200 and something airplanes. Let's see here. No, Germany. Germany had, no, okay. Yeah, we had 230 ships and landing crafts, who left England on the 8th. But no, I'm not sure what the numbers were.
Well, the number of ships, what I saw in my pulling down some figures on the Dieppe raid was 250.
Okay.
the largest, a lot of landing craft, as you said, the largest vessel was a destroyer. Those were destroyers. There was nothing bigger. If I read it right, there was nothing larger than a destroyer involved in the Dieppe raid.
True, which will go to part of the reason why the raid was such a, I don't want to say blunder, but such a bad outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I guess 2 years prior, once again, I'm not up to speed on my British military history. Shame on me.
It's okay, neither am I. But we're winging this one, man. But we're having a good conversation.
But apparently, the British Navy lost like 3 to 4 of their main quote-unquote captain ships, their large-scale battleships, carriers, and what have you. And so due to those losses, the British Navy was very reluctant to put their ships within close striking range from German artillery.
Mm-hmm.
And since this was the case, they basically said, hey, we only feel safe sitting X amount of distance from the shore. And so they did not do your standard naval pre-invasion bombardments. They didn't sit out there like we did on Guadalcanal and many of other missions, just bombing the hell out of the island for, 8 hours prior. That never happened. And
right.
so now you have these guys who are going to be potentially landing on these beaches in well-fortified, very little pre-invasion molesting going on. And obviously the plan that failed on D-Day as well was the pre-beach bombardment means you have craters to hide in.
Let me go back to what you just said.
Sure.
So British naval losses prior to Dieppe,
yep,
which obviously would have put the scare into them. What comes to my mind, and I'm assuming you're not just limiting that to the ETO, right? You're just talking about wherever.
When I was doing research, they listed the vessels by name, but I just didn't have time to jot them down.
Was it Prince of Wales and Repulse?
Yes, and another one.
Off the shores of Singapore?
Yes, correct. They were sunk by Japanese. Yes.
Right, by Japanese G4M and G3M bombers, which came out of what is present-day Vietnam, by the way.
The historian referred to them as capital ships, meaning their main vessels. And so due to the loss of capital ships, in quotes, they were reluctant to lose more of their capital ships on this one operation. But yes, You're absolutely correct. They were sunken off by the Japanese Air Force.
And it's probably, there were others too, but the Prince of Wales and Repulse, also known as, I think that was Force Z, I think was the code name of them when they were operating the waters off of Singapore. And I may be partially correct or showing my ignorance when I shouldn't have ignorance on that. But and that was early, and I mean that was like right after Pearl Harbor. So yeah, they would have been extremely reluctant to put heavy naval resources in harm's way.
Yeah, so it was minimized. I'm looking here; it was actually minimized. The pre-landing naval gun support was limited, consisting of only six Hunt class destroyers, each with 4 or 6 4-inch guns. So that was basically their pre-landing invasion bombardment and artillery strike was supported by 4 and 6-inch guns off of these 6 different vessels. That's it.
Okay. According to what I'm seeing, I'd like to know if what you're looking at corroborates this. You know how many vessels were sunk?
I'm not seeing it here, but go ahead.
What I came up with was one. There was one destroyer lost.
Yeah.
106 aircraft. You know how many landing craft were lost?
Oh, I can only imagine, especially off of Blue Beach.
What I'm seeing here was 33 landing craft.
Yeah, and so
and I've got a number here on armor, of course, was put ashore to try to help. I mean, the thing.
Well, the big rub is too is German double crossers, or let's say, I guess it'd be French double crossers. Germany got tipped off like 2 to 3 days prior. I guess some planning leaked out because one of the other objectives to this invasion, as we said, the primary objective was to pull out the Luftwaffe, try to damage as much as they could. But 2, we're going to give our guys objectives as well. So their objectives was A, to take out any coastal military installations, take German POWs, look for intel, but also try to evacuate 15 freed French resistance fighters who I guess have been feeling pressure by the local Germans who were occupying the area. And so we're kind of trying to go on a little recovery run as well. But hypothetically, mission-wise, they're only supposed to be in town 24, 48 hours at the most. It was like a hit and run.
This was not a get in and establish a major beachhead from which to bridge onto, like obviously D-Day, we're supposed to go ashore. We're supposed to establish a major base of supply communications and then press on and advance across France into Germany. That was not the case with Dieppe at all. There was no intention of staying for any length of time at all. Like you say, it was to get in and get out.
And so the Germans were tipped off by some double crossers, some bad agents, if you will. And so they started moving forces in, moving in land troops. They did have a very well secured radar base off the coast, and they had, I don't know if they're 88s, but they had some large scale artillery pieces a couple miles back from the coast. Once again, very similar to the layout of D-Day. And so it was a little stacked against us. And from what I understand, we didn't do any early morning dark hour landings. Basically the landing started in daylight. As the first landing craft headed towards Yellow Beach, consisting primarily of the number 3 commandos, they had two different staging areas. And so the commandos broke off into 2 groups, if you will. And the farthest north was spotted by a German U-boat, and they actually took some fire. And they were able to get rid of the Germans, but not without them notifying the home base, if you will, that the game is afoot. And so the commandos, the number 3 commandos, they came in on Yellow Beach, came in hot. And I can't remember off the top of my head how many of them landed there, but pretty much out of Group A, they held the Germans off for quite a while and ended up surrendering. I think there was about 150 of them. Group B, only 15 commandos made it to shore. The rest of them were lost either when their landing crafts were sank or when they were strafed coming out of their landing crafts. But out of the second group, only 15 commandos landed.
That's another little piece of information I gleaned. When you have exits from the beach, I mean, like, at Veerville and Dog Beach and all that, when you fast forward ahead to D-Day, what do you have going? You have combat engineers going in trying to clear paths for incoming tanks, armor, whatever, supplies. What I read about on Dieppe was that the beach exits were actually pretty quickly cleared by the engineers.
Yeah.
Or the British call them sappers, I think.
I believe so.
I may be wrong. But those guys actually did a pretty effective job of clearing the beach exits. But it was just ensuing circumstances that conspired against them to kind of render that null and void. The terrain, one of the things I watched on World War II TV about it today, because Woody did some great shows on it a couple of years ago. And the terrain is just horrendous, man. It's extremely rocky, Well,
not only rocky, and I think it was primarily Blue Beach or White Beach. It was one of the 2 primary beaches. Rocky, Rocky's not even an adequate term, because do you think rocky, you think boulders? No, this is more like oversized pea gravel, and gravel probably about rocks about the size of baseballs and smaller. Think of it like the rock equivalent of a ball pit. And so when the tanks came off and the heavy artillery, they just sank in this stuff. The rocks and the gravel was not consistent enough to support the weight, and so everything just sank down, and then all those pea gravel and those baseball-sized rocks got into tracks and basically rendered the newly minted what was the primary tank for the British at that time?
Was it the Churchill?
Yeah, it was the Churchill tanks. Just pretty much got annihilated on the beach because they could not move.
If their undercarriages were rendered operationally ineffective, then whatever artillery batteries the Germans had in place, be it 88s or Germans had 105s too, didn't they?
Yeah, but I'm not yes, they did. They had like 4 placements inland, but I'm not sure if they were the 88s or the one or what the size was. I just know
whatever they had would have had more time to go to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did I say how many tanks were lost?
No.
30.
That's a lot of tanks in such a small area.
It is. Because when you, again, to compare to, if you look at the map, Dieppe is east. You go much further west, what would have happened for D-Day? That operational area was so much larger. there's a Canadian military historian named David O'Keefe. He's written at least one book on Dieppe, maybe two. He brought out, he was saying, because it was a really good interview with him with some great footage, current day footage of Dieppe and the terrain. He's been through like 150,000 pages of documents researching his book. It's called One Day in August by David O'Keefe.
Yeah, because I believe up until recently, the Canadians and the British kept that stuff classified. And so for the longest time, it was kind of painted as this huge success, with the exception of the knowledge of the people who lost people there. And mind you, we haven't got into it, the large number of these guys who actually sat out the rest of the war in German POW camps. A lot of them were actually taken prisoner.
Yeah, let me see. Did I get a...
We'll get down to that here in a little bit. But back to your point, though, it was definitely, rough sledding. And we kind of talked about Yellow Beach. Orange Beach, the primary mission of Orange Beach was the number 4 Commando, including the aforementioned 50 United States Army Rangers, was conduct the landing 6 miles in west of Dieppe to neutralize the coastal battery, landing on the right flank and force at 450. As I was kind of saying, this is very, very reminiscent to what they would be doing at Point du Hoc, and maybe this is why they sent the Rangers to kind of train the number 3 Commandos. But I was just reading it. Oh, here we go. They climbed some steep slopes. Now, they weren't quite using the small grappling hook based ladders, but once again, they were climbing very steep terrain, trying to get to a target or a objective at the top of from the lowlands. Everybody knows in combat, he who holds the high ground holds the advantage. Well, as we saw later on, so they were sent along with the number 4 Commandos to reach this battery and neutralize it at top of this steep, incline. They were successful. This was actually the only successful section or occupation or objective of Jubilee. This was the only group out of all the beach landings. These were the only guys who made their objective, did what they're supposed to do, and get out and get back on their ships and leave at the predetermined time. And so out of all the beach landings, Orange Beach, consisting of the number 4 Commandos and the 50 United States Army Rangers, they did make it back safely to England. But by this time now, as we said, on the way to Yellow Beach, because they kind of landed in succession. It was much like D-Day, but without the airborne. The Rangers had an objective they needed to meet to help the preceding or the additional landings succeed, and landing over at Yellow Beach, the number 3 Commandos, their objective would make things easy as well. But by this time, we know the Yellow Beach, they were spotted by Germans. They had a little naval battle. Now we have Orange Beach. We got the Rangers coming in. So by this time, the German army is fully aware of what's going on. And as they try to land on Blue Beach, that's when things really started going awry. Smoke screens blew away because the change in the wind. You got the artillery all lined up. You got the German army had kind of reinforced themselves because, once again, they were tipped off ahead of time. And so Blue Beach is where the number 3 Commandos were halted by the German defenders at Blue Beach. And so you had the number 3 Commandos, and then you had the Royal Regiment of the Canadians, plus 3 platoons of the Black Watch of Canada, and the artillery detachment were tasked to neutralize machine guns and the artillery batteries protecting the Dieppe beach. They were delayed for 20 minutes by the smoke screens that should have hidden their assault, but as we said earlier, had lifted in the wind change. And so it was kind of, once again, a precursor, if not worse, than what we would experience in certain beaches throughout D-Day. The well-fortified German forces held the Canadian forces that did land on the beach. As soon as they reached the shore, the Canadians found themselves pinned against the seawall, unable to advance. With the German bunkers placed to sweep along the back of the seawall, the Royal Regiment and the Canadians were annihilated. Of the 556 men in that regiment, 200 were killed and 264 were captured. So if you're doing the math, only about 30 guys, give or take, either got off the beaches or maybe were assigned to go back with the landing craft to get whatever. But basically all the guys, damn near everybody, was either killed or captured.
So yeah, like in a 6 to 9 hour period. Now you were just talking, I think you were just focusing on one regiment, what you said, but in a broader scope at Dieppe at a 6 to 9 hour period, like 1,000 casualties, 900 of which were Canadian.
Yeah, this was just Blue Beach. Out of the 7 beach landings, this was that 500 was just at Blue Beach. So out of the guys who landed at Blue Beach by themselves, 264 were taken prisoner and 200 of them were killed.
And one thing that is always going to be a byproduct of any major operation like that, Canadians, let's be even more specific. A lot of people from Quebec apparently see the Dieppe raid as Canadians being used as cannon fodder.
Absolutely.
So I guess most of them were from the Quebec province.
And once again, so I guess the unanswerable question, because as we said with the research that we did, the Canadian brass volunteered their men to keep them occupied and give them something to do other than training every day. And then obviously the British were happy to do so. I guess the unanswerable question there is, where do you place the blame? Yes, they were cannon fodder, but they cannon fodder strictly at the behest of the British Army, or does the Canadian Army have to kind of take a little credit for volunteering their guys?
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing is, you had a school of thought that say, well, it was just a learning experience for D-Day. Well, everything was a learning experience for D-Day, and so you can
the
say,
Pacific.
Well, the raid may have, if you're keeping a tight focus on what it was for, what its objectives were, maybe it was a failure, huge loss of life, obviously, for the Canadians. But if you step back, it still was brought about in June of 44 that we did stage a major invasion, i.e. overlord, and get ashore on D-Day.
Yep.
And begin a major armored and infantry advance, into France, across Germany. So, I mean, I say that I'm sort of using that same mode of thought that, forgive me for drawing the comparison, but the guys who died on Peleliu died for no reason. Well, not really.
Yeah.
If they hadn't been assigned there, they would have gone somewhere else, but not to stay on that. It was one operation that was part of a larger strategic picture that took a long time to come to fruition. Have you seen, there's this guy, David O'Keefe, in his book, One Day at August. I really want to read that book because did you, in the reading you did about it, Don, did you come across any intelligence connection? I don't mean that the Germans had an idea that this was about to happen. That's not what I'm talking about. Did you see anything that referred to intelligence operations and that there was possibly an objective relating to that? Did you come across anything like that?
No, I didn't get to do that deep of a dive.
Okay. Here's where I was going with that. So O'Keefe in his book talks about the Enigma machine.
Yes, I did.
Okay. 3-rotor Enigma machine that the Germans were using for their coding. And the Allies were well on their way to sorting that out and then breaking that. They had pretty good intel that a 4-rotor Enigma machine was about to be deployed. And so part of this, and I'm really simplifying, but one of the objectives of Dieppe was to get their hands on a 4-rotor Enigma machine.
Yeah, because
were they able to do that? I don't know.
No,
I didn't get that far.
We failed, and as we know from history, our first real interception of the Enigma machine was not the way it was showed in U-571 or whatever it was with Matthew McConaughey. Nay, it was recovered from a sunken German U-boat later on in the war. But the thing about it, a four-rotor Enigma machine, even if you don't know anything about Enigma machines, you can just kind of take what you can maybe visualize off of a typewriter. The reason this is a big deal, I don't know how many characters are on a rotor, but it's basically, put in modern day terms, imagine you're a computer hacker and you're trying to hack passwords that are 8 characters long. Now, after a while, it's going to get easier mathematically because there's only so many characters that can occupy each character in that 8-character password. But imagine if you found out that your enemy or the computer owner was about ready to employ a new password that was able to have 17 characters. So now the amount of effort, energy, time, and training and the probability of actually decoding these encrypted messages would be affected tremendously. And so that's why it was such a big deal to find out that this four-rotor Enigma machine was possibly coming to market, for lack of better terms. And so, yeah, I did hear that, and we were not successful. Now, we're talking about Blue Beach. One of the problems with Green Beach is Green Beach wasn't like a peninsula or a plateau, but it was separated by a body of water, a river. And the only way to get to the objective was over a bridge. But as we said, by Blue Beach and Green Beach time, the Germans knew what was going on. And so they tried and tried and tried to take this bridge. And this was the group out of Saskatchewan. By the time they managed to reach the bridge, the Germans had positioned machine guns and anti-tank guns there, which stopped their advance. With the battalions dead or wounded piling up at the bridge, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Merritt, the commanding officer, attempted to give the attack impetus by repeatedly and openly crossing the bridge in order to demonstrate that it was feasible to do so. However, despite the assault resuming, the South Saskatchewanians and the Queen's own Cameron Highlanders of Canada, who had landed beside them, were unable to reach their target. While the Camerons did manage to penetrate further inland than any other troops that day, they were also soon forced back as the German reinforcements rushed to the scene. Both battalions suffered more losses as they withdrew. Only 341 men were able to reach the landing craft to embark. The rest were left to surrender for this part of the battle. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt was awarded the Victorian Cross. Now, it said 340 men were able to retreat, but it did not give us the full numbers of how many started the landings. But I'm going to imagine a hell of a lot more than 341.
Yeah.
And basically this...
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No,
you go ahead, man.
Go ahead.
Yeah, take a sip of your beer there.
This is Arizona Arnold Palmer Light.
No, I hear you. Regardless, I mean, we were talking about a massive loss of life, a quick operation. I mean, and let us not ever forget one of the main reasons we do what we do, Don, and that's to remember the sacrifice and the bravery and honor that, because there were a whole lot of guys that didn't make it through that operation.
Yeah, sadly, the exact casualties, as per our friends over at Wikipedia. Ground forces lost on the Allied side. Canadians, 907 killed, 2,460 wounded, and almost as many, 1,946 were captured and basically spent the rest of the war in poorly managed German POW camps.
So did they ship them back to Germany, the POWs?
I'm not sure. They just said that they're in POW camps. Lord knows how many of them went to where. But that's not all. Amongst the United Kingdom, 275 commandos. It says casualties, but it doesn't claim how many, whether they're killed, wounded, or shot. It just says United Kingdom, 275 commandos. The United States, 3 killed, 5 wounded, and 3 captured. Royal Navy, 1 destroyer lost, 33 landing crafts, as you said earlier, 550 killed and wounded. Amongst the Royal Air Force, we lost 64 Spitfires, 20 Hurricanes, 6 Douglas Boston bombers, and 10 North American Mustang Mk1 fighters. 62
So
killed.
there were Mark I Mustangs. They were probably Coffin Lids or Malcolm Hood.
Yep.
Model Mustangs.
Now, keep in mind, Canada alone amongst the Canadians, 907 killed. That doesn't count the commandos and all the ones we just mentioned. Right. Germany, according to the German numbers, how much were actually true. We know how the axis of evil like to fudge their numbers, but we'll assume after 80 years they're reporting accurately. According to this, German only lost 311 Weimar Republic soldiers killed, 280 wounded. They lost one submarine chaser and 23 FW-190s and 25 Dornier 217s.
Dornier 217s, okay. And how many Focke-Wulf FW-190s?
23.
Okay. Man, the FW-190 is one of my favorite planes of World War II. I absolutely love that thing. Had a BMW radial engine.
How did that come to fruition? Pre-war purchases or just stole them?
Well, no. I mean, the German FW-190.
Oh, yeah. Okay, never mind. Yeah, BMW. Never mind.
But, I mean, it's you still kind of, by kind of hitting pause there and asking that question, that's a good thing because obviously the main German fighter was the Messerschmitt Bf-109, which was an inline liquid-cooled engine, Daimler-Benz DB-13, I think, if I remember correctly.
Now, were the Allied aircraft at the time were they air-cooled or were they liquid-cooled?
Well, the Mustangs would have been liquid-cooled inline engines. Most of the air-cooled radial engines were Navy fighters, so they were going to be in the Pacific. Hellcat, Wildcat, Corsair, which the Hellcat and the Corsair weren't even operational yet, but we're talking Dieppe here. Spitfires, liquid-cooled inline engines, the Merlin. Those early Mark Mustangs would have been liquid-cooled. The British had the Mustang, the Mark I Mustang. Man, I'm not even going to attempt to pretend like I know much about that iteration of the Mustang. I don't know if there were any Hawker Hurricanes at Dieppe.
If there were, 20 of them. We lost. There's 20. I don't know if we lost them. There was. Let me rephrase this. When I say these numbers, it just says Royal Air Force. Listed under casualty and losses, so they don't say shot down. But anyhow, yes, there were 20 Hurricanes there.
Well, Hurricanes would have been inline liquid cooled. If you're gonna, that's a great question you ask. Now we're moving beyond the scope of Allied planes and including the Luftwaffe. Heck, man. I mean, there were a lot of fighter bombers used. I don't know about medium bombers. If the Allies used any medium bombers at Dieppe, if they had, they would have probably been B-26 Marauders, but I'm not sure about that. But the Germans, the Ju-88, which I don't know if there were any used at Dieppe, but they had radial engines. The FW-190, Focke-Wulf 190 obviously had the BMW 801 radial engine. So I'm thinking most of your air power would have been flying the liquid-cooled inline engines that day.
So on an operation that was initially designed to try to ambush, if you will, the Luftwaffe and take out as many of their planes as possible, the end result, roughly, based off my bad math, Allies. Now, once again, we're based off a list that says casualties and losses. So whether they're completely destroyed, shot down, or just extremely beat up, I don't know. But regardless, numbers, casualty and losses as per our airplanes, 100 for us, 47 for the Germans. That plan definitely did not go the way we were anticipating it to go.
It was actually, that was one of the first numbers I read, Don. It was 106 aircraft for the Allies.
Yeah.
And 48 for the Germans. So, yes, definitely not a good day for Allied air on that day. And you got to figure, man, I mean, that channel weather, it was in August. I mean, I would assume, I don't know that it would have been cold, but you can almost, I mean, judging from all the modern day footage I saw of the present day, I mean, you can pretty much safely assume it was overcast, cloudy, gray. Visibility probably wasn't the greatest. Temperatures not cold in August, but not warm either.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just thinking from the standpoint of visibility for the pilots and air crew, cloudy, overcast.
Research undertaken over a 15-year period by the military historian David O'Keefe, as you said prior, uncovered 100,000 pages of classified British material archived files that documented a, quote, pinch mission overseen by Ian Fleming, best known later for authoring the James Bond novels.
Yes.
Coinciding
Goldfinger.
with the Dieppe raids, O'Keefe states that number 30 Commando was sent to Dieppe to capture the new German four-rotor Enigma code machine, plus associated code books and rotor setting sheets. The Naval Intelligence Division planned the, quote, pinch to pass such items as cryptanalysis at Bletchley Park to assist with the ultra decryption operation. According to O'Keefe, the presence of the other troops landing at Dieppe was to provide support and to create a distraction for the commando units. Or I wonder if that's why the Rangers were there too. Commando units in order to reach the German headquarters and to capture the Enigma machine. They were a cover for the Enigma target. So yeah, I'm just trying to.
Interesting stuff.
I'm trying to peruse here, but I think either the device wasn't there or they just never made it there. But
so they have it. And this is making me want to read O'Keefe's book. Did they have it dialed in? Like, okay, we think one of those four-rotor Enigma machines is going to be at location
W. And not only is this machine going to be there, but there's going to be a code book, kind of like a us old folks would know that as a Cliff Notes book on how to set up this thing.
Exactly, yeah.
And the coinciding numbers and letters to the German alphabet. To decrypt.
So what happened? The Allies get there and the machine just wasn't where they thought it would be?
I'm not sure. I'm kind of reading this in real time. Kind of perusing this, but yeah. I think the best thing to do is to go out and check out the O'Keefe book. And
I know. I was pretty interested hearing him talk about it.
Let's see. The number 30 commandos were formed as a special intelligence unit in September 1942, a month after the raid, composed of 33 Royal Marines, 34 Army troops, 35 RAF troops, and 36 naval troops. It was later renamed 30 RN Commandos, Special Engineering Unit. Later research identified that the unit in Dieppe raid was number 3 troops of number 10 Interior Allied Commandos known as the X Troop. But yeah, very interesting stuff. Makes me definitely want to add a new wing to the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast local studio library. And, because I think one of the things that at least we can't speak broadly, but I'm going to, us armchair historians, we tend to focus on our own and not so much on what at least a lot of our allies did in less known conflicts. And the fact that this is basically to the Canadian people and their military what Peleliu is to the Marine Corps, probably would be justifiable to learn about this and to do more research on it. But it's definitely, I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is one of those things where you're reading it. It's like you just, I was literally reading and writing and doing show prep up until, 15 minutes, 10 minutes before we went on the air.
Well, and look, man, I mean, I wanted to delve into this. And if anybody listened and will be listening to this episode and they get frustrated that, well, it's obviously, obvious that, Henry and Don they don't know that much about Dieppe. No, I don't claim to.
Yep. But
I'm a PTO guy who loves the European stuff, and I know, you are too, Don. And I mean, I wanted to take this subject on tonight because it's 80th anniversary.
Yep.
It is a fascinating event. No, I haven't read a book about Dieppe in a long, long time, but I felt like we needed to to mention it and talk about the sacrifice and loss of life there. And I really wanted to read O'Keefe's book, man. I mean, I'm not just kidding on that. That's.
And as we did, and as we've said prior, many episodes back, and as we kind of did with Sarah, and when it came to the USS Indianapolis, if you're listening to the show and you know a lot on this particular topic, or any topic for that matter, and you think you can contribute to the show and maintain a 35 to 55, sometimes 110-minute conversation with the three of us, you have to be able to talk and not lose your voice and maintain a cadence. And if you can do that and provide some entertainment and some education, please, we ask you to send us an email at mailcall@WTSPWWII.com, and we will happily book you on the show. And because not only will you be educating our audience, but you'll be educating us, because there's only so many spare hours in the day outside of work and private life that we can read and dedicate to certain topics. And so we want to extend our roster, if you will, to you, the listening audience and potential contributors of the show, because there's just so much history out there. And as Jeff and I have said in the past, and we've said when Henry came on the show too, one of the things we like to do, and we kind of pride ourselves on, is we try to discuss the things that aren't ran over and over and over on back when History Channel used to provide content. And if you actually have Military Channel included with your default package, and doesn't be some obscure add-on you have to get through your satellite company, a lot of stuff's just reran from documentaries that were pumped out in the 70s and 80s. So we like to learn new things and maybe less covered things, and I know our audience does as well. So please send us an email to mailcall@WTSPWWII.com. And while you're on your computer, on your email, we kind of hinted at it to the opening of the show. I wasn't really so much as an advertisement as I just want to give props to the members of Patreon. A couple of them did upgrade their accounts, and so that goes to help support the show. And if you guys want to support the show, but you don't want to do it financially, or maybe with inflation you can't do it financially, that's fine. The easiest way to support the show is just to share it. It doesn't cost you a thing to say, hey, check out this podcast. Henry does a good job. Jeff is fantastic. Don, not sold on him yet, but check it out anyhow. Get the word out there. The best thing you can do is share it, and the numbers are growing. As Henry learned from minding his own business at the Rural Museum in New Orleans, he had a couple people come up and say, hey, I dig the show. You do a great job. Jeff is awesome. Don, jury's still out on, but keep it up. And so,
Don, you're the straw that stirs the drink, man. Come on.
Yeah, but I'm that new paper straw that all the coastal communities require. For those of you who don't live in a coastal community, no, seriously, for those of you who don't live in a coastal communities, those paper straws are atrocious. They do not make it through a meal, and it's like sucking on a cardboard tube. It's horrible.
They are. You are correct, but that's not you. That's not you.
But anyhow, so please head over to WTSP World War II. Share us with your friends. You can sign up. You subscribe on YouTube. That doesn't cost you a thing, and that goes a long way to help. And then, just spread the word and get the love out. And if you do subscribe and listen on us on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, for you old people like me, if you could go to our page, give us a review, preferably a 5-star review. Type up a little paragraph or so people don't think you're a spam bot. And that goes a long way too, because what happens is when people listen to World War II based content and historical based content on the apps, whether it's iTunes, Google, Spotify, or whatever, because we are on all of them, when you guys add us to your favorites, listen to us, and give reviews, those platforms will be more likely to suggest our podcast to people who are listening to other historical based podcasts who may not know about us. And so that's another great way to support the show. So, Henry, got anything else you want to hit before we get to signing off?
No, I mean, you're like specifically what are you talking about? That's the end of my factual information. Scant though it was on Dieppe, makes me want to read O'Keefe's book and learn more about it.
Speaking of YouTube, in all openness and all honesty, and give the guy a shout out for basically providing my content and my training tonight. I'm trying to quickly pull up on my phone, go to my history. Just type in, I think it's called The Raid on Dieppe, The Slaughter on the Sly, or something like that. It's a quick 20-minute little documentary, well done by a British historian. it's taking too much time to pull it up in my history on here. But that's where I got a lot of my subject matter tonight. I was just kind of jotting down notes as I was listening to it before the show. Very well done. He has some great historical footage. Some of it's colored, and very interesting. And you guys can go and get the rest of the information out there.
And where I got mine was the episode with David O'Keefe on World War II TV with Paul Wood Edge.
Absolutely.
It was done 2 years ago, as it so happened, but still.
And what we'll do is always to encourage you to go to WTSPWWII.com. We will include the links to the World War II TV edition or episode on this subject matter, and I will locate the video in which I was talking about, and both of them will be available on our website. So if you're listening to this podcast, you get home and you want to kind of finalize your education on the topic and get more information, you can go to our website to find those links. That'll take you over to YouTube. And I think that's just about going to do it. But we do want to hear from you guys. We don't hit it enough. We're usually on here with guests, and we're so excited to have guests on that we don't hit all the plugs and all the things that make Proficient Podcast run. And so we do want to hear from you, whether it's comments, critiques, questions, support, anything else. Maybe you know a good deal on a GPW alternator that Jeff might need. Just send us an email to mailcall@WTSPWorldWar2.com. We do want to hear from you. We love it when we get the mail in. We often do the What You're Reading segment, and we'll get to that here in a minute, but I have a feeling we're both still reading the same book. But we want to hear from you guys. What are you reading? What should we be reading? We're always telling you what you should be reading, but maybe you should be telling us what we should be reading. So once again, send us an email or hit us up on Facebook or Instagram. WTSP on Instagram, and just search for the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast on Facebook, and tell us what we should be reading. We want to hear what books you guys find interesting that maybe we don't cover on here, or I doubt it, but possibly maybe you know of a PTO-based book that none of us have heard about. Maybe you'll surprise us with one of those. But yeah, we definitely want to hear from you guys. Send us an email, mailcall@WTSPWorldWar2.com. And I know I'm still reading the same book, but maybe Henry's a faster reader than I am. What you reading, Henry?
I've got about 90 pages left in Helmet for My Pillow. I said last time I was going to do a reread of that. So
yeah, you're definitely faster than me because I'm about a quarter way through. But wasn't I correct when I pointed out the fact that how elegant of a writer he was?
Oh yeah, extremely so. And it's been interesting for me after having been through the Pacific miniseries so many times. To read Helmet for My Pillow. This is probably my third time to read it. I know I read it as an adolescent, and then read it again when the Pacific was being made. But to reread it now, just in a different context, has been very interesting. And I'm enjoying it thoroughly, as of course, knew I would. There was no question on that. But thing is, man, I'm not sure, with that. Not trying to get into a big plug-in thing here, but I told you I was going to be on a panel with Richard Frank and Saul David at the International World War II conference at the World War II Museum in November, discussing Devil Dogs, which is Saul David's newest book on K-35. I don't know. I had thought when I finished Helmet, I was going to read Ian Toll's third volume of his trilogy because I read the first two. But now, if I got to be on a panel with Richard Frank, man, I may have to do a reread of Guadalcanal. Not sure.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Because I was like, wait a minute, Guadalcanal Diaries. I have both of them.
No, Guadalcanal.
Yep, I'm looking at it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's a big book.
It is.
That's a thick book. The small font. Lots of pages.
It is a big book. That's not going to be a 2-week read.
Real quick, back to Helmet for My Pillow. And Jeff and I pointed this out early on, and we've kind of mentioned it before with both the Pacific and Band of Brothers. When they're trying to take so much content and cram it into a 12-part miniseries, sometimes you have to take the important story and apply the story to the inaccurate character and or person, because the message behind the story is more important than who it happened to, and you can't go develop 3 episodes to develop character on a person just so you can share the story. And so a fun homework assignment, if you guys have not read A Helmet for My Pillow at all, shame on you. You should read it for the sake of reading it. But if you have, but you haven't since you watch HBO's Pacific, and I'm sure Henry will see where I'm going here, find a little game. there's a lot of content from Robert Leckie's book, A Helmet for My Pillow, which points out exactly that the story is more important than who it actually happened to. 2 examples. On the New Britain episode, you see a very flustered, a very forlorn, a very just at the end of his rope, Robert Leckie have a GD meltdown when his boondockers get stuck in the mud, and he screams, "Kill me, would somebody be a good guy and kill me?"
Yeah, just effing shoot me.
But Henry knows, because he just probably read that chapter, that I believe that was actually Chuckler and or Red who said that. They were the one having the meltdown, getting stuck in the mud and the sand.
Actually, I may not be to that point yet.
Yeah, it happened to Chuckler. There's a great character, Red, in that book that they did not have in the miniseries at all, and he had a very sad but kind of humorous in that way love affair with his M1 helmet. He was convinced that his M1 helmet was going to save him from the world.
Yes.
And when you got 19, 18-year-old fatalistic guys sitting around looking for ways to have fun, their comrade, their cobbler, their homeboy that they loved so dearly in their group, who was so scared and at his end that he lived in this helmet like a turtle lives in the shell, they thought it would be great fun and amusement that Chuckler would trip Red and cause his helmet to come off, and another one would shoot up with his Thompson, which they did, and he about had a nervous breakdown. Yeah. And they completely annihilated this helmet that he refused. He would sleep in it. He would shower in it. He would never take his helmet off, even when they were quote unquote off the line, because he was just so terrified and his anxiety was so high that they thought it was going to be good fun. Let's have a good laugh and shoot the helmet. And they did not get the exact results they were anticipating from that.
And he mentions, he says, we felt so bad the way, because man, he was getting Asiatic. He was getting jungle fever. He was going crazy. And they didn't realize it until they saw how he reacted. And then, Leckie says, we didn't make fun of him after that.
Yeah.
We felt we just left him alone.
In the miniseries, when Leckie is walking through the P-41 wing and he sees Gibson, I believe. Interesting thing about that show is when you're watching the Pacific the first time through, you don't remember Gibson being in any of the damn show. His character was he looked like everybody else in the background, that you don't recall Gibson until maybe the scene where he kills the wounded Jap in the hut, and then the next episode when he's in the P-41 ring. But if you go back, he was the one who shot the cow on the train. Remember that scene?
I hated that. And
there was a couple of scenes where it was almost like, the writers the writers, when they got to the P-41 wing, they realized, well, crap, we need to write this character back in some of the early episodes. They kind of found situations and made him the principal character in that little side situation. So as you go back and rewatch it, you'll realize that Gibson actually did have more of a role throughout the movie. But when Gibson is talking about how he was on the work detail and they had the artillery strike come in, they all jumped in the slit trench, and a Marine, because they had their shirts off, a Marine was laying on his back praying, and he could feel the lips mouthing the words of the prayer on his back. That did not happen to Gibson. That actually happened to Robert Leckie. But once again, are you going to film an entire episode where Leckie's out doing a work detail and recreate that? Or you have somebody who's broken down at his wit's end behind chicken wire explain it in a very sad, more important way? I think their way of doing that probably, I think having that character explain it in that environment probably struck home more than if they would have reenacted it with Robert Leckie hiding in a trench and someone saying a prayer on his back. I don't think it would have visually came across unless they zoomed in on that guy's lips. You know what I mean? So I think that was probably a better choice. But there's a lot of stuff like that. Go ahead.
Here's your quick little tidbit on the train scene where they shoot the cow.
Mm-hmm.
And not nitpicking on the Pacific, because we all agree we loved it. But I talked to Sid Phillip about that scene. Sid Phillips and I had a conversation about that. And he said, yeah, that would have never happened. He said, man, before we got on that train, they shook us down. They made sure we didn't have any weapons on us. But I mean, I'm not saying that to jab at it and go, they shouldn't have done that. That's not my point at all. But but because every movie, Memphis Belle, Band of Brothers, every movie that we've loved, they all do stuff, artistic license, whatever. But yeah, shooting the cow, that absolutely didn't happen, according to Sid Phillips.
And back to, like you said, artistic licensing. Two things. One, I think they made that scene because they needed another scene to put Gibson in, so he has a reason to matter later. And two, I think more importantly, I think they did it they needed a way to show Robert's change in mental attitude from before he went to Melbourne and when he was leaving.
Part of the character arc.
Yeah, and showing the importance of the Australian people. The importance while he was there, he was able to track down a leg of lamb for her family and get all these much needed supplies. And so
he was becoming emotionally involved.
Yeah, and so to show that he was upset that he didn't care that they killed a cow, he cared that they killed somebody's dairy cow that they would use to get milk, etc. And so, but yeah, it's just it does kind of suck that sometimes. And furthermore, let's say you're Gibson's great grandchildren. You want to think your great grandfather shot somebody's cow? I mean,
yeah.
So those are just always, the little things you run into. But yeah, so definitely read Helmet for My Pillow. He actually does go over the Frenchie killing himself scene in that book.
I'm not to that yet. I'm not looking forward to that.
Yeah. And one of the things like he gets into that book too, and your father did as well, was the dysentery and just the freaking. So much is written about the battle with the environment. Not, we all know about the battle with the Japanese, but just the battle of surviving out there is well documented in this book as well. You've read Strongman Armed, correct?
Oh God, yes.
Before or after?
That's one I recommend to everybody who says, "Give me some good ideas to read on the Pacific War." But yeah, I read Strongman Armed as a kid. I just read it again here about a year ago. Yeah, superb.
And the fun thing about that book is Robert Leckie is such a good author in the fact that in that book he pulls content out of with the A Helmet for My Pillow, but he never refers to himself in a first person. Anything that he pulled out of that book to reference to him, he refers to as a Marine or a private. He doesn't say, I was there. He does that entire book from the third person. And so he replaces his name and Chuckler's name with a Marine or a group. But if you've read Helmet for My Pillow enough, you see the overlaps there.
Yeah, and he had to, with Guadalcanal, man, he had to really stay he had to walk a tight line because he covered Guadalcanal in Helmet, he covered it in Strongman Armed, and then in Challenge for the Pacific.
I have not read that book.
I thought I had it. I thought I'd gotten like a paperback edition of it here a few years ago, but I can't find it, so maybe I didn't.
I had a customer who was into the Pacific as much as I was, but he didn't have room or desire to build a library. So he would buy a book, read a book, and then give it, if it was a PTO book, give it to me. And so I actually have both covers of Strongman Armed. I have 2 softback books in both covers. So that's kind of cool. But
that is cool.
Yep, so I'm still reading The Helmet for My Pillow, so is Henry. If you guys haven't read it or haven't read it in a while, we strongly suggest it. But yeah.
I'm just not sure, man, if I need to jump into Guadalcanal after this or do Ian Toll's third trilogy. I don't know.
Well, if Guadalcanal wasn't so beefy, I would say you could probably wait a couple more weeks, but November's not too far away.
Well, I'll be finished with Helmet probably in the next couple of days, but I can get through it. I just, the thing is, Don, I mean, it's before you know it, man, it's going to be getting cool at night. I'm about ready to start reading about some Normandy and,
I can't wait.
Get back into the ETO. But I mean, with all the stuff I got going on, I'm going to kind of have to keep, I tell you, man, there's an author who's written a trilogy, Sand and Steel, Snow and Steel, and I think Blood is Peter Caddick Adams.
Okay.
But his trilogy, one deals with Normandy, one deals with the Bulge. Anything dealing with Battle of the Bulge, I absolutely love.
Yep.
And then the third volume in that trilogy deals with the last after the Bulge, kind of the last year. I'm really looking forward to getting that. I don't have that on my shelf.
Absolutely. And so, yep, I think that's going to wrap it up for us. And once again, we want to thank each and every one of you. And so for myself and Mr. Henry Sledge and the absent Jeff Copsetta, who wants to share his love with you guys and his appreciation for everything you guys do to support us, we want to say thank you so much, and we will talk to you all next week.
This has been a Digital 410 production.